Anthony, John, and Mark, who changed our field for the better by introducing disc arthroplasties and other technologies into our world here on the North American shores. And the road to there is a very remarkable one. So the confluence of medical research, medical education, and surgery is one tower, but the other one is obviously device industry. But making it all happen through funding and through planning to get something above board installed is a fairly remarkable undertaking and a great story. So I'll pass off to my dear partner and friend, Dr. Ziegler, to give some introductory comments on our three guests tonight, who are not spine surgeons, but affected us as spine surgeons big time. Jack?
Thank you, Dr. Chapman, and thank you to the Viscogliosi brothers in chronologic order. It's Anthony, John, and Mark. And again, they they're behind every somebody. There's somebody who's really responsible, and these guys were responsible for recognizing that this technology was needed, and getting it into the United States and getting it started with FDA studies. So we're going to share a lot of that history and also get the investor side of how innovation happens into our discussion, because that is their forte. So, what's the gap? We all understand that people have a great idea for an implant or a technology, and ultimately they envision what it is, but there's a hole in the middle there, and what's in between that, and it's usually money, and particularly if it's something that's going to go through an FDA study. I'll show you that there's a lot of money that needs to happen, and that's something that physicians usually don't really understand or know about. If we think back to the older guys who are on this webinar with us, know that in the early to mid 1900s, research was really kind of self-funded, or it was institutionally funded. Even prestigious journals like JBJS, most of the articles there were small retrospective studies of an individual's case reviews or a small series. They used kind of subjective endpoints that were biased. The patients always wanted to report their outcomes, so the surgeon would feel good. The surgeon wanted to report his outcomes so he would feel good. So it was just not terribly good science. In the 1930s, that changed a little bit. Although the NIH was founded in the late 1800s, actually, it was in around 1930 that the government mandated that they begin funding additional research. And interestingly, in looking this up, originally it was chemical warfare research, but it started the mechanism for funding research with more rigorous study designs, with formal grant proposals where they monitored the progress of the grant. And it still remained mostly for academic rather than commercial reasons. Studying insulin's effect on diabetes, and not necessarily something that had a commercial outcome. But that changed in the 1980s, where there's a new paradigm to fund research. Instead of coming through government grants, it was that the sponsor would pay for the study, but the FDA would continue to oversee every aspect of that study, from the initial pre-design through the design, through the running of the study, and then that the FDA had the final decision as to whether something would be approved for commercialization. So 1976 was a landmark year. That's the year that Congress passed the medical device amendments to the FDA Act, the Cosmetic and Device Act. And it divided implants into three classes. A class one were general purpose instruments. A class two were instruments that were similar to something that was already on the market before 1976. But they defined a brand new class three, which were novel technologies, which did not have a predicate before 1976. And they said that those devices would have to undergo rigorous testing, and most commonly that was going to be a multi-center prospective study that randomized this novel technology under very tight observation and follow-up to a device that was already FDA approved for a similar function. So one of the earlier examples of those were the threaded fusion cage studies in the mid to late 90s, and then the artificial disc studies, Charité and ProDisc, which we'll talk about in some detail. It started in 2000 and 2001. And the reason is the federal government decided, and not terribly as a taxpayer, that it's not appropriate to use taxpayer dollars to pay for research to approve a private company's implant that eventually was going to be commercially available for sale and for profit. So that was the shift, that now the sponsor would have to fund the study. And it could be a classical, a very wealthy multi-generational company that could self-fund. It could be a very large corporation that could afford to self-fund it. But for smaller companies, for startups, for individual inventors who just started a company for themselves, they often had to get money behind them. They had to get some investment, and that's where we'll talk to our guests a little bit about that world that we don't know so much about. But overall, the FDA remained involved in oversight, beginning with study design proposals, study design finalization. They would oversee the study itself, including site visits to the investigators' sites. Some were announced and some were not announced. And the overarching concern for the government, and again, appropriately, was for patient safety throughout the study. And then the FDA, their final caveat was they would only grant approval at the end of the study when they reviewed all the data, and they had to be satisfied for both safety and efficacy. And those were its mandates from Congress in that 1976 amendment. Just for a quick look at what the timeline can be, and this is from the Medical Device Manufacturers Association. So this is from the organization that most of the big device manufacturers belong to. And they're saying that the average age of a timeline for one of these studies, if you start at the concept development stage, which can be a few years, percolating, thinking about it, doing preclinical studies, testing, and then going all the way through to even getting a PMA can be, 12 years. If that's not sobering, I don't know what is. And if you're starting at the IDE stage, it's still a 6-year journey. And we'll talk about that with both the Charité and the ProDisc and the Activell studies. What's even more sobering, however, is how much these studies can cost. This was from JAMA just a couple of years ago, and they came up with the astounding number that if you start at the very beginning, this proof of concept stage, and have to go through everything, it can be hundreds of millions of dollars. And according to JAMA, just the IDE part, once you put your application in for a pre-market approval study through the market launch and some post-approval studies, it can be in the neighborhood of $70 million. So long timeline, long horizon before you can make something profitable out of this, and a lot of money and risk that goes into the study. So that's the segue into the Viscogliosi brothers. And as they introduce themselves, they'll tell us a little bit about their business, but they've morphed into being company creation, company, and look for investors to invest in a company that's going to do something that will produce a product in the neuromusculoskeletal world. And they were the first ones in the industry really to concentrate in our world of neuromuscular, initially in spine and then into more musculoskeletal. They founded the company in 1999. They're based in New York. The three brothers came to see us at TBI. It was either 1999 or early 2000, but it was right at the birth of the FDA studies where Scott Blumenthal implanted the first Charité in year 2000 to start that IDE study. And then we've maintained a friendship and a mutual professional admiration society for 25 years. It's been nice to see the growth on their side and the growth on our side and the growth of the technology. We've all kind of enjoyed that together. And in fact, Tony gave the keynote address at last year's motion preservation course through the Seattle Science Foundation. And his talk was why the Viscogliosis believed that the U.S. was ready for an artificial disc replacement. And it was a great talk. And it is available on YouTube on the Seattle Science Foundation channel. I'd encourage anybody to do it. It kind of comes across my screen every once in a while. So I've watched it a few more times as well. So these are the brothers. It's getting the three of them together in one place is remarkable, even virtually. So really appreciate your getting together with us, and we look forward to having a great discussion. So thank you again. I'm going to unshare, and we'll kind of hit the road, but let me start in reverse order just so that Mark will get a couple of words. Mark, the environment in the late 90s was in spine was that fusion was king. That was the furnace for most implant companies as well as for spine practices. And arthroplasty, even in Europe, had sort of a negative connotation. There wasn't this big explosion of this is the next best thing coming from the Europeans. And yet you guys recognized that this was a real potential for use in the United States, in a place where we didn't know from anything about arthroplasty. So before your brothers overwhelm you, tell us a little bit about how you sense that environment and how you sense that potential in the US, and then we'll ask the other guys.
Dr. Ziegler, Chapman, Blumenthal, and Geyer, first of all, thank you for having us here to share this story. As I think about your question, Dr. Ziegler, the first thing I reflect on a lot of how we got here is by standing on the shoulders of giants, of those that have come before us, and learning from them to appreciate and value what was important to clinical outcomes for patients and to successful surgical outcomes for surgeons. And in that process of learning that, in the late 90s, many of us will remember Infuse was on the verge of coming to market on a PMA approval through Medtronic Software Organic. I believe it received PMA approval in 2001. But at the time, I think we all knew that that the industry was on the verge of mastering the art of successful high fusion rates. Maybe not quite clinical outcomes, but successful high fusion rates. So what we started to think about and what we were looking at and trying to uncover and discover and think through is the very obvious concept that in just about all the other fields of orthopedics and neuromusculoskeletal healthcare, motion preservation was vital to successful long-term clinical outcomes. And we know from the history of even beginning with Fernstrom balls all the way through the Charité, and then, of course, Dr. Marnay's wonderful invention with ProDisc, that as we were learning to look in other spots of the market besides fusion and were gravitating towards motion, we would meet with the surgeons and talk with their patients about the outcomes. And what was so compelling at that time was as we would sit and hear these patient stories, they were very different than the fusion stories that we were hearing from the patients. And to us, that was really compelling.
These are the
And
patients
Europe,
in France, Mark.
yeah,
These were
in
the French
France,
patients.
in France, and what was really compelling about that is as we would learn and understand that, it became apparent to us that even with very successful high fusion rates, you could tell that there was a difference that these motion preservation patients were experiencing. And to us, we wanted to capture that and invest in it and support it because we felt it would be an important step forward for patients and surgeons. So, it was clear fusion was where the industry was focused, but we also knew it wasn't going to be the sole answer for patients. And so we were looking to help support other ideas of innovation and motion preservation. So let me pause there. We could talk for an hour about that, but Tony, I know Tony's waiting to jump in, and so is John. But go ahead, guys.
I'm just saying, Mark, Dr. Ziegler asked to give you the first few words, not an effective media.
Well, I figured between you and John, probably you guys won't hear from me again, so I'll just get it in now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. That was great.
John, you want to go about your perspective?
Mark's answer was so long, I forgot what the question was.
Did
But anyway,
all three of you guys go to France, and were you involved in when they bringing the patients in and talking to them? And I think you got Dr. Linovitz involved in looking at the X-rays, and Pascal was helping translate the patient histories. And you were able to get a remarkable number of Dr. Mornay's patients back together again.
So you're actually, Tony and I were there
Yes.
to do the patient interviews. Dr. Mornay brought in 5 patients. Actually, Barbara Guth was with us because she was actually a sales rep there in France and did the translation. And we asked to meet the patients without the surgeon. And we had Barbara with us, and they recanted the stories. And I think, Tony, we spent with those 5 patients, we spent about the whole day.
That's right.
Because they were similar to Mark and Tony. Once you turned them on, you couldn't turn them off. But fundamentally, Jack, you brought up Dr. Ziegler, you brought up, investing. And I think, we take kind of a little bit different view. So it's not just about money. We really wanted to understand the technology and make sure that this technology works. And those patients who came to meet with us were between, at that time, I think 3 years and 7 years out.
That's right.
And we're still having great results. So it was pretty amazing. And we weren't just naive in walking in and didn't really know, because, our history before this was Tony and Mark were the leading analysts on Wall Street, neuromusculoskeletal healthcare. Many of you, and how we met you all, were sitting in the conferences, listening to the surgeon presentations and the technology presentations. And then, with you all to understand what are those clinical unmet needs that you all are challenged with. And it only made natural sense that with total hips, total knees at the time, the spine being a 3-joint complex, movement is essential. So we needed a technology, and we knew that it would take a long time, because actually, if you look at the history of hips and knees, before they really became mainstream, it was that 12 to 25-year journey. It was 20, when total knees came out and total hips, they were still doing, fusions of those joints, for 25 years as that technology developed. So we knew that it would be a long journey. And the only way that you can sustain it is because you're looking to help the patient and change how care is delivered by the surgeon to the patient. So I'll let Tony take it.
Let me ask a question.
Really dying now.
Let me ask a question to maybe Tony, since his turn, or really any of the 3 of you, that you may have never been asked before, because I've never asked this question before. So you go over to Europe, you talk to the patients, you see the technology, and you meet with Terry Marnay. How did you make the jump to say, okay, we've met this surgeon who, by the way, is really technically way good, and he gets these way good results. Did it ever occur to you, like, maybe this technology in the hands of general spine surgeon Joplin, Missouri, that was just random, sorry, could they reproduce these results? Because Terry is an exceptional surgeon. Did that ever cross your mind? Like, okay, we can bring this to the US, but can we reproduce these results?
So I'll answer from my point of view. No, because we looked at the instrument sets and saw that the instrument sets were designed along with the implant. So when we took that original version of ProDisc and created the more modern version of ProDisc, and when we did the ProDisc C, we developed the instrument sets along with the implant in conjunction to allow the surgeon and to have a reproducible surgery amongst all different level of surgeons. That was one of the challenges when we saw the Charité, and maybe that's a whole different webinar about actually how we formed Viscogliosi Brothers, what technology was the original technology, how Mark found that one, how Mark found ProDisc. But we saw that with the technology, the other technologies, ProDisc, by going that way in successful instrumentation design with the implant together, would allow a reproducible result. So I would say as we started developing the next generation, Scott, that's when we really started thinking of, we have to allow this to be used by any surgeon, not the surgeon with the best hands in the world.
Totally right.
Yeah,
Sorry, John.
I mean,
interestingly,
part of what that algorithm is, and Tony tells this story really well about the generational shift of what creates a market, particularly in orthopedics. Tony, you should talk about, first it's the implants, then it's the co-functioning of implants. And
Oh, don't egg them on. It'll be a 4-hour
you should tell this,
webinar.
There is reproducible story after story in every subsegment of orthopedics, and you should talk a little bit about the science of that art, actually.
Yes. There's too much to talk about in too little time. What I would like to begin by saying is that nothing is achieved solely as an individual. And I got lucky being the firstborn son. Okay. And that is, God's grace. But God's grace also gave me my two brothers through our parents. And it's because we were able to find the way to work together to create a direction, and then a solution, and then an outcome. So let me address that, if I may. Let's start out with today, and then we're going to go back to the future. Okay? Today, after 25 years as a single family office of Viscogliosi Brothers, we have formed, invested in, and built 42 companies. We have been successful in selling 21 of those companies to other owners who've done really great things with them. Of those 21 exits, 5 of them we made zero money on, or lost money. When we make zero, that means we've lost all of our capital. Some of them were huge successes. What's the difference? Today, by the way, we have 21 different businesses that we own all of or part of. All of those businesses are in the neuromusculoskeletal space. And that space is the space you live in. The 10 architectural tissues of the body. So that's where we are today. You could say professionally very successful, far from the success that you guys have achieved as physicians who've cared for thousands, tens of thousands of patients. But we've had our role in financing that innovation. And let me tell you about how that came to be, because this is what we're here to talk about, among several points. To fund innovation requires an absolute passion as the first thing, a deep desire that is unserved in your own being. And that came from a near-death experience that I had as a 14-year-old boy, being hit by a car, riding my bicycle to work as a caddy, and then recovering over a 2-year period from all the orthopedic face, head, neck, leg, and arm injuries that I had from that accident. And that and I'll tell you that when God gives us something difficult, we receive this difficult circumstance as an opportunity to do something good with it. And so that became a journey of a lifetime. And that journey, in that journey, I got lucky to recruit my brothers to be a part of that incredible journey. And they have taken that journey and made something really out of it. And so what happened is I decided to be in this space, to understand how we can change healthcare. We have to be the absolute best and have more, better first, more knowledge than anybody else on Wall Street, better access to information, knowing you guys and all the other physicians that we came to know so well, and deploying that intelligence ahead of other people. And in that way, we brought other people along with us who believed what we were trying to achieve. And so we became investment research analysts and published 7,000 pages of investment research and got Wall Street and the venture capital world that was developing in the 80s, then the 90s, to focus in healthcare and to focus in on this space. And we became a little bit like the Pied Piper, leading a direction, though not over a cliff, but on a long journey. And that journey then, and I've got to tell you, we're 3 Italian brothers from Detroit. Our parents immigrated from Italy to the United States, and we made America our home. And that led to this opportunity of great journey. And so the brothers didn't inherit anything but love and opportunity and an education. And those are the most valuable things, far more valuable than money. And there we go. Okay. And that inheritance of love, education, and opportunity followed by belief led to us becoming recognized as really smart guys in this investment space of med tech and healthcare. So then we didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, and I really mean that. We went to, and Mark is the truffle hunter, okay? The one with the nose for innovation. And I'm the guy who says yes, and John's the guy who says no, and that's how we work together. And we've been doing this since before we formed Viscogliosi Brothers. But in 1996, when Mark was 16 years old and we were working at an investment bank, Mark was an intern. Okay, a kid, 16. I sent him to Europe to go to 3 conferences. The firm wouldn't pay for it, so I paid for it out of my own pocket. And go learn orthopedics, Mark. Well,
5 weeks, 2 of the conferences were in Amsterdam.
I
I
didn't think he
I
was going to
almost
come
didn't
back.
come home.
And I told him, why did you come home? I would have never went home. I'd
Well,
still be in
and actually
Amsterdam
the
right now.
conference, which still is one of my all-time favorites, is the CCOT conference, which, as you know, is held every 3 years. And it, to me, was kind of the global innovation conference for everything happening outside the US from a fundamental research perspective. And that's where we saw JBS, which was a French company. They had ProDisc 1 on display. And part of what we would do at these conferences is literally go to every single booth and ask about all the products in the booth to learn about what they were doing. And here's the thing we love about this space. Everybody that we've ever worked closely with in this space has a matching passion for innovation
Yeah.
and creating products that make a difference so that everybody wants to talk about their innovation. It's actually easy to get that information and learn. And when you go at this time in 1996, there were 1,600 companies globally in the orthopedic space. 45 of them were publicly traded.
Yeah.
That means 1,555 companies were private family-owned businesses. To Tony's point about a knowledge advantage, our mission was to learn about these businesses and develop relationships with these families and with the surgeons that they worked with on a day-to-day basis. And that's where we learned about ProDesk, was there and at that time.
And,
And actually the Charité too.
and
Right.
so Mark
Tony,
came back and
Tony
just,
alluded to that, but your initial interest was in Charité, right?
yeah. And
It
just
Yeah.
to round out the story, Mark came back and we talked and we said, look, the world has got to go to spine motion preservation technology. It can't but do anything else.
Well, there's a
Because
part of
every
the
other joint of
story
the
that
body is
goes
gone
one
there.
step back prior to that even, which is Ray Medica, Tony.
Right.
Billy
93.
Ray, your original introduction to Charlie, I mean, God rest his
Yeah.
soul,
Wonderful, man.
just a brilliant
Brilliant.
surgeon. And, you know, I think you made an investment, Tony, in Ray Medica in 1993 or 94.
93.
And which was just an incredibly, if you think about what was going on in 1993, the ABC 2020
episode.
pedicle screw wars were out there. The cage rage was, you know, Spine Tech was going right
96.
through the IDE studies in the US. Surgical
Brannigan
Dynamics
cage.
was developing the ray threaded fusion cage. And then a disc nucleus company, which was about as far away from the rest of that stuff that could be, was also there. And so Tony, sorry, I didn't
But
mean to-
let me
All right,
just
well,
give let me
oh,
get
sorry, go ahead.
let me just give a little European perspective as a guy from Germany. So, uh, to give the audience in general a little perspective of what incredible foresight Mark had in these stands at CCOT. I probably was at that same meeting actually. Is At the time, disc replacement in Europe was heavily controversial, very
Absolutely.
controversial. This was not a standard of care. He did not go to these stands where everybody said like, "Hey, this is good stuff." In Sweden, certain surgeons like Dr. Nakimson called it the rape of the spine.
Yes.
In Germany, a ex-Olympian who was from Eastern Germany, Charité, was in the freshly or newly liberated Eastern Germany. This was not a mainstream device. This was hawked by a relatively small company that had niche products only.
Yep.
Right.
The French always were considered kind of the geniuses, but this was not mainstream. And what went on there kind of just went on there because of whatever happened with between French red wine and brie cheese was not transferable to the rest of the world. So this was, from my perspective, just always something that just amazed me, how you saw something. And this goes to Scott and the clinician, how you saw something that was in Germany, having been raised there and having worked there until 85. But this was nowhere close to a mainstream technology. This was fringe back then. So you saw something that many clinicians, most clinicians, in fact, doubted.
Well, Dr. Chapman, first of all, you're too kind. But sometimes we tend to forget. We refer to the Charité as Charité, but the original name was SB, which stood for Dr. Shelnack and Butner Jans, the original surgeons behind it. And that's when I say we stand on the shoulders of giants, those giants are the pioneers who took that risk to
Yeah,
try
absolutely.
something that, despite Dr. Nachemson talking about the rape of the spine, they were still in search of a better answer. Dr. Steffi working with Dr. Fraser and Dr. Uh, uh, in Manchester, England, Dr. Rob Fraser in Adelaide and Dr. Raymond Ross
Raymond
and
Ross.
in
Yep.
Manchester, England, working on a rubber total disc replacement in 1988, 89. I mean, think about, to your point, Dr. Chapman, that's where, I mean, we're just lucky to be able to
Yeah.
see the genius there, but that's where the genius was, to be able to take that risk and say, there's got to be a better answer.
And the arrows in the back that they all took
Yeah.
for those
Yeah.
steps.
As did we when we started the FDA
Yes.
studies. It was very controversial. Our defense was, well, we're doing it in the most scientific way we can, with oversight and patient compliance and permissions. So if we're ever going to learn, this is the way to do it. But we still got a lot of threats toward this as to how bad patient outcomes were going to come back and bite us. So I just want to go fast forward just a little tiny bit about the competition between Charité and ProDisc, and then Maverick, and then as the implant studies started, and it was intense competition, nowhere more than at Texas Back, where we were running both of those studies in the same institution, because we promised we put up a firewall, and we did. We were actually pretty good about it, but at some point, did you guys ever come together with other companies and say, listen, we got to stop fighting each other. We sort of need to, get the technology accepted rather than each individual device.
So, Jack, to that, yes. And that was the creation of the Spine Arthroplasty Society, where I was with Dr. Marnay and Martinique at Dr. Waz French spine conference that was always held in Martinique. And Dr. Chapman, speaking of red wine and brie, that's about how Dr. Marnay and I came up with the concept of creating the Spine Arthroplasty Society. And we formed it, brought on a number of the surgeons to be on the board as we promoted it, and a clear vision that we allow all disc companies and new non-fusion technologies and ideas for that to be a platform to, doctors interacting and talking about these new things. And right before this society was formed, Dr. Michael Meyer in Munich decided to have an arthroplasty symposium, which was de facto the first one. And that society grew and grew, and is now, I'm sorry, I can't believe the name of
Islas.
it.
Islas.
ISAS.
ISAS.
ISAS. Excuse me,
Right.
ISAS.
But to your point, Jack, we went to the other companies and said, guys, we can't be beating up each other because the whole industry is beating up on us. We have to fight fusion and fight the industry and the current thinking. So let's do this and present together. And I don't believe that I've ever said a truly negative thing about Charité. As we're bringing on ProDisc lumbar, I always said, if I need a lumbar surgery and want a total disc, if I can't get ProDisc, I would have a Charité put in me. And that was the mantra of how we march forward to help shape and change the thinking of the industry.
And John, you have two cervical discs.
I do.
Hey, John, I want to ask you a question. So, you guys have played a tremendous role in bringing this technology to the US. And what you said, it sounds nice about getting along, but we know Medtronic was, always bad mouthing the
Brutal.
Charité. But what I want to ask the three of you, was there any time that any of you said, you know what, I don't know if we're doing the right thing, or this is keeping me up at night?
Never. Not on my end.
Actually, the opposite happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me share a little anecdotal story. We alluded a little bit to this, but the first company that we got to know was Waldemar Link.
Yeah.
And there was a guy that ran the US business for Helmet Link. His name is Andy Greenberg. And we approached Andy to talk to him about taking the North American rights for the Charité and creating a business around it. And we negotiated for.
And that was before VB was formed.
That was,
Oh, hold on. Just to be clear, one step back. Mark and I both left our positions on Wall Street to form VB
Right.
because we started to have these conversations with Andy to acquire the rights of the Charité because it was literally sitting in a closet at Waldemar Link.
And the
then
three
I'll let
brothers
Tony tell the rest of the story.
and the three brothers were living in a studio apartment in Manhattan, scraping together our bucks to literally survive in the city. Go ahead,
Wow.
Mark.
Well, and so we had, for 18 months, we hired the best law firm. We said, we don't know how to do this kind of stuff, so we need to hire the best law firm we could. It was a law firm named Dewey Ballantyne at the time. So a great credibility, white shoe firm that we couldn't afford, but we somehow found a way to do that. And what we ended up doing for 18 months, we negotiated 37 versions of a distribution and license agreement with Helmet Link and with Waldemar Link's attorneys to try and set up a business around this. And we said, basically, let's create a business. You'll own part of it. We'll own part of it. We'll be responsible for recruiting the management team, financing it, bringing it through the IDE clinical trial, and ultimately be responsible for the PMA approval of the device. And what ended up happening is, this is one of the things that I really love about John. About the 10th hour of the typical phrase is 11th hour, last minute. About the 10th hour, John says, something's not right here. Helmet's not going to do the deal. It doesn't feel right. What do we do? And I said, I think I have an idea. Let's go to Escalab for ProDisc.
That's right.
And so we wrote a proposal to do basically the same thing with ProDisc. I'll never forget this. We submitted the letter to a gentleman named Bob Parrott, who was the president of Escalop USA, and who we had developed a relationship with over time. And Bob brought it back to Germany.
This is while the deal is still open with Helmut.
While
Like,
the
he
deal
hasn't
is
turned you down.
still active, and we have a purchase agreement in place with Waldemar Link on the Charité.
And you guys are eating ramen noodles in the
Yeah.
That's right.
No, we couldn't
And
afford
Mark, were you
ramen
sleeping on the floor?
noodles. We would get the 50-cent bagel on the street, and that was lunch.
And so literally we get an email from Bob that says, "Hey guys, got your proposal. We've discussed it in Germany. We'd like to convene a call with you." We said, "Okay, now this is AOS 1998 in New Orleans, or AOS 99."
It was
99.
it was no, it was 90, yeah,
99.
99. So we convene a conference room where we get the speaker phone out. They all get on the call. And now the Escalop leadership was on this call. This was Professor Dr. Michael Ungetum, Dr. Volker Daum, Christoph Henningfeld, Dr. Harold Stallforth, Anton Shelkley, who ran the spine business, Gutmar Eisen, who is a product manager, and Bob Parrott. And they get on the phone with us and they say to us, "We've reviewed your proposal." And so we're kind of bracing ourselves for some sort of a rejection or a hard negotiation. And they said, "We accept it."
Yeah, that was amazing.
And my response was, WTF, what do we do now? We have the two products. How are we going to do it? And these two guys say, well, we'll run them separately in parallel. Like, okay, sounds good. But we
at the end of the
won't get
day,
Fast forward to the 11th hour, we're in law firm offices to sign the deal with Link.
No.
While we're negotiating.
In Helmut's apartment
In
on
Helmut's
Park
apartment.
Avenue at the Waldorf.
Yep. And so we're there, and the documents are there, and Helmut comes out.
right in the middle of the table. Right in the middle of the table. All spread out. And I look, and Andy was sitting there, and I looked at Tony and Mark, and I said, he's not going to do this deal. And they're like, you're an idiot. They're the documents.
Sure enough, he comes out. And Tony, you should tell this part of the story.
No, you go. Well, so he comes out, and he says, "Gentlemen, we've worked very long on this.
18 months at that point. 18 months.
37 drafts. I realize."
Hold on, one more thing. Mark, during those 18 months, wrote the ID study for the Charité.
Right.
So Mark was the actual author of the study for the Charité because we thought we were getting a deal done.
Comes in the room.
Tony,
So Helmut, what did Helmut say?
Comes in the room and says, "Gentlemen, thank you very much. This is a wonderful opportunity. I realize how big of an opportunity you have taught me to understand. I don't need your capital. I don't need anybody else's expertise. I own this business. I have a team, and I can finance it myself. So, gentlemen, I just cannot sell my baby to you." And I said, very calmly,
Well, that was great.
He then stood up, grabbed the documents, and pulled them back to himself.
Right.
and I said very
not
calmly,
with
"There's three
malice
brothers."
Wait. So you were going to sign he expected you initially to sign the documents,
The deal
but then
was
he gives his
done.
little speech.
The documents were all there to be signed. I mean, the pages were marked for signature. The pens were on the table.
Yeah.
The documents were open. He walked in with his lawyer. to sign the deal.
So it was
And he-
11:59.
Oh, yeah.
And he
Yes.
said, I realize
Well, but-
I cannot sell my baby.
Baby.
Well, that's
And I
interesting.
said-
So basically, you guys you gave him the blueprint how to do the deal in the US where he retained 90 to 95% ownership. And it's very interesting because when he was negotiating with Medtronic before he sold to DePuy, he used the same line. Why should I sell my baby to you?
Yeah.
That's really
Yes.
interesting. That's the first time I've heard this story.
Well,
That is
this
really
the
interesting.
This is the first time we've ever told it in public.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
Tony, you have to tell them what you did.
Oh, this is the greatest comeback line of all time.
I said, Mr. Link, thank you very much for the opportunity. We understand your position. And Mr. Link, we are going to be your greatest competitor. And he laughed, as he should, because here are
He
three.
actually laughed in our face.
And
Well,
and
I
he- I don't want
wouldn't
to be
say in our
negative
face,
about
I would
him.
say-
And we're not. What he made a goddamn brilliant move.
Oh, no
Okay, as a
question.
business guy, he made a brilliant decision. He didn't need us. He's got a blueprint. He's got the map. He's got the IDE. He understood the big opportunity. He made a brilliant move for himself. We protected ourselves too. And so when he left, it was natural because here are three young guys who've never founded a company, never built a business, and have no money.
No, we had a DJ business growing
Okay.
up.
Yes, the three of us were DJs. Don't tell anyone. We did own a DJ business.
Okay, so let me change let's change course a little bit and let me ask a couple questions. This may be a little bit more of my role as being a disruptor. So you guys, I'm gonna ask two questions. The answer may be the same. So you guys have looked at a lot of deals. You've done a lot of deals. Question number 1A is, what was your biggest, the brothers, disagreement in spine and looking at companies? And number two, which company did you pass on that was like, oh my goodness, we should not have passed on this company?
Wow.
I would say, first of all, for those that have been in the room with us, there is
Yeah.
always disagreement. And I think that's part of the magic of why we're fortunate, because we really, I think, are each other's toughest critics about how to think through the right opportunities, the right strategies, the right tactics. And the safety of that, of being able to work with your brothers, to know that no matter what you say, they'll be there tomorrow morning. And there's power in that, by the way. A lot of people knock working with family and the challenges of working with family. I would do it all over again to live my life exactly the same way without hesitation.
Yeah, but there's been some challenges, okay?
Of course, of course.
I knew John would give me a good answer
So
on this
the biggest disagreement, I've got to tell this little quick story. In 2013, the newswire hit that Stryker Biotech was indicted by the Department of Justice. Without telling my brothers, I called Tim Scannell and I said, Tim, my
He was the
brother,
president of Stryker Biotech at the time.
No,
Jamie Kemmler was. Tim
Right.
at that time was president of, I want to say, the spine business, or just graduated to president of orthopedics, maybe at that point.
Yeah.
And I said to Tim, my brothers and I want to buy Stryker Biotech. And he literally said on the phone to me, are you out of your mind? And I said, no, Tim, now is the perfect time for us to do it. We believe in the power of BMP7. We just think, before we couldn't own it. Now is a really interesting time. He said, okay, I'll talk about it. We'll take it back. I called my brothers and I said, guys, I just offered to Stryker to buy Stryker Biotech from them. They screamed at me and
Yeah.
said, "Are you out of your mind?" And I said, "No,
And
I
then
don't
Tony
think
said
so. I think."
yes.
And
But
that we had a few weeks of pretty aggressive tension of disagreement there. But it all worked out beautifully in the end. In the end, by the way, we did do that deal. It did close. And remarkably, Department of Justice, because it was no longer owned by Stryker, and because the business had transferred ownership and decision making, DOJ dropped the indictment on the business and on pursuing key officers of the company. So that was a really kind of very fascinating story. If you ask a panel of lawyers if that would ever be possible, they will all say you're out of your mind to do that. And that just goes to show that there can be ingenuity even when kind of the strictest interpretations of things may exist. And
all
five,
right, biggest miss.
biggest miss. Tony
Sean,
and John,
what would you say?
I know what my biggest miss is from my standpoint.
I don't look back at anything that we passed up.
Yeah, that you would
So
say
I mean,
that.
that's how I live. It's
Yeah.
in the past, it's done. I forget about it and move on.
I
You
like
Great
must
that. The
answer.
know,
glass is always full.
you must
Great
know,
answer.
however, that many businesses, therapeutics, Tournier, uh, we competed to acquire or to invest in as the lead investor.
Crema Scoli Ortho,
Yeah.
Lima Orthopedic Group
Yeah.
with Gabriel Lualdi, before it was acquired and went through private equity
Each
exchange.
of those we made acquisition offers on.
Aircast,
Yeah. That
with
was
the
the first
Johnson
one.
family. Yeah, I mean, we could
So-
tell a lot of
So
different.
can I say my
But I
biggest
don't regret missing.
regret
Go ahead, Tony.
that we sold one moment after we bought it, Stryker Biotech to Olympus. Now, it happened to be, to that point, our most successful deal ever because we took zero risk and made $27 million. Zero risk. The
don't
biggest
regret
regret is that they didn't follow the plans we laid out.
Yeah,
And today, OP1 is not on the market because of that.
yeah, surgeons
So
don't
they
have
took a
the
great
option.
opportunity, and the market and patients suffered because of the failure to succeed.
Hey
And
guys,
in order
Hey,
to,
Tony, can
Sorry.
I ask one quick question?
go ahead, Rick.
Mark, you do all the research. So the artificial disc is very mature. It has its issues as far as adoption because of reimbursement. But what's the next area you guys are looking at? Because you said we went from fusion to artificial disc. Where's the next VB?
so
Changing
each one of the three of us should say a comment to that. Go ahead, Mark, you first.
I'll say changing the pathophysiology of disease. So disease modification of the major diseases of spine care. And I consider that degenerative disc disease. We have a business called Spine Biopharma that's pursuing that. There's a path to do that with lumbar spinal stenosis, and there's a path we think to do that with adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. We sponsor a research lab in Montreal called the Viscogliosi Lab for Musculoskeletal Molecular Genetics that for years has studied some of the underlying causes of these diseases. We're not done. We will never be done.
Yeah.
Of course.
Do this for
So
the rest of our lives.
that's my problem. I'm trying to retire and they keep pulling me back in and saying, "Oh no, we have this or we have that." I'm like, "Come on."
Hey guys,
So-
let me touch on something that Rick talked about the maturity and the 25 years of history now with disc replacement. Tell me your take on why the insurance industry has been so slow to adapt, particularly for lumbar, which I think is the sleeping giant of arthroplasty. What's from your standpoint? What do you think the deal is? Why are they giving us such a hard time? Cervical, much less so than lumbar.
So I'd like to say two things
Because-
real fast, if I can. And John, let me then turn it over to you. The first thing I'd like to say is to answer Dr. Geyer's question,
Go
because
ahead.
I didn't get the chance to answer that. It is applying scale to spine non-fusion. Mark the words I'm saying. Applying scale to spine non-fusion. That's the answer, my answer to your question, Dr. Geyer, of the next big thing. John?
So, Dr. Ziegler, to your point about lumbar total disc, when we bought back ProDisc into Sentinel from J&J, there was about 10% of the US population that was covered for lumbar total disc. There had been no innovations from when we sold ProDisc to Synthase to when we bought it back at Sentinel. What was that, 6 years ago now? 7 years ago?
2017, December
Yeah, so-
2017.
So,
And by the way, Jack Ziegler, you told us we needed to buy that back from
Yeah.
J&J.
So
You
we
were the
went-
one.
that's a whole nother, 2-hour
The next seminar.
about that. But the team at Sentinel has worked hard on doing that. We did bring innovation by bringing the new end plates to market, so there are lordotic options. And then finally, after 20 years, getting approval for the 2-level lumbar and going back through and getting that data. So if you look at what you all fought, the lawsuit out in California by the patients to the insurance companies, we're now pretty close to 90+% of the patient population covered by lumbar disc. I mean, we had to put together a strategy and start processing that. And that strategy was put in place and started working with the insurance companies in about 2019. So it's really not that long. And because it's the only disc on the market now, we did have the Esculap disc, but now that they're off the market, withdrawn from the market, I think it gives the insurance companies a little bit more power because there's so few of similar devices pushing there. But I think the data that Dr. Marnay just published for the 25 years in JBJS, the work that you all do every day, the work that the
Your
Sentinel team
publications also.
does every day on getting new insurance coverages, I think it will be another year or two till we see, you not facing the challenge as a surgeon to get that covered.
John,
I'd like to say that, if I can
we are
just
all
say.
believers. John,
Good.
we're all believers in arthroplasty, but the problem is really reimbursement. It's, we don't have trouble getting it approved now. It's reimbursement. And it's pathetic that Blue Cross Blue Shield will oftentimes pay us $50 for the second level. We'll get 2 levels approved and they pay us $50. I mean,
That's ridiculous. That's just goddamn
it's nuts.
ridiculous.
It's nuts.
Let me
But
say
I think
this.
we should do a part 2. Jack and Jens, I think we should do a part 2 with these guys.
We'd
I'd
love
be
to
all
do
in
that.
favor. This is so entertaining because I had so many questions, and again, how this amazing spark happened and was sustained. I wanted to explore the sustain and sustenance part of this far more because it took a lot of chutzpah, but it also took grit to kind of go through the
Grit.
hard times. I'd be all in favor of doing a part 2. Getting you 3
Let's do
together
it.
is
We
like
gotta
getting
get
the
'em.
old gang together
Yeah.
together with my
And I just want to
ATBI
say
heroes.
2 things I think are apparent to anybody who is watching this. One is your passion that came through, with the 3 of you. And the other is, I guess, what I call fraternal genetics. The fact that you are brothers and, you love each other, you fight with each other, but you each complete the whole. You each has an area of expertise with considerable overlap, but just enough apart that you can feed off each other. And it's obviously the chemistry has worked really well for VB. And for those of us who are in the VB universe, we very much appreciate it. So thank you
I
again.
just need to take a
What
quick
I tell
moment.
people about myself is I'm either all in or I'm all out. I'm never tween. So it's either 100% or you just don't do it. And that goes back to Dr.
Yeah.
Blumenthal, your question of what's your biggest regret. I don't have any of anything that I missed because I never did it. So it's out. It's only go forward of what I'm doing.
I just want to add one
Yeah,
comment
Mark, yeah, go ahead.
before we run out of time. There are so many people that we have not had the chance to talk about tonight that
Yeah.
played such an important role in all of our lives in this journey together. I mean, going back to the NAS conversation that we had till 2 a.m. with you guys, with Steve Hochschuler over cigars, arguing about why you needed to be in the study.
That's a story.
Dr. McGee was there. Dr. Alan Weinstein was there. John Moran, one of our board members, was there. There were so many influences in our lives that when we have the chance to drive that interconnectivity, that's where the spark that you're talking about, Dr. Chapman, happens. That's where the little inspiration happens, because a lot of what we do is ignited by this together, but it's sustained by all those around us that give us the strength to continue.
And the same passion. I mean, the risks that TBI took. And then you talk about Dr. Delamarter out in California. Dr. Chapman, the risks that you took, because you were part of the trial also for Protus lumbar, and Protus cervical. So the risks that you took in your career to do that.
Hey, so the vote is in. Everybody requests a part 2.
Let's do it.
We
Yes.
gotta get the 3 of you together again, because this was amazing. And again, this could go on for a long time, even without a nice French red wine and brie. So no, the triangle of the 3 of you, to pick up on Jack's allegory, is well said. And again, it's the magic transpire at the screen. So we'll have to come to a close. Randy Davis, everybody says Armin Kachadran, everybody says do a part 2, do a part 2. we gotta let Hannah, first of all, thank you, Hannah Kennedy, is your first session that you ran for us at SSF TV tonight. Thank you, all 3 V brothers. Thank you for the 3 term members of TBI. This was so cool. It's instructive. And again, the inspiration part we really covered. There's so much more to cover, and so many stories and bylines. So let's plan it part 2. Happy holiday. Merry Christmas.
Happy and healthy New Year,
Happy
everybody.
Hanukkah.
Yes.
Jens,
Thank the 3 of you.
I'd just like to say,
Thank you guys. This was awesome. And thank you, Hannah.
today is
gets the last
December
word.
the 18th. On December the 16th, 25 years ago, Dr. Marnay implanted the first of the 3rd generation Pro Disc L in France. And here we are today.
Yeah.
Amazing. Anyway,
Wonderful
thanks, guys.
thing.
Thank you for a wonderful
Thank you very much.
Together. We're so delighted.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Everybody have a Merry Christmas and
now.
Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year, and God
Best to
bless
your
you all.
families.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jens,
Bye
Rick,
for now.
Scott,
Take care.
thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye for now.